Whenever you ask people what the best console for survival horror games was, you're very likely to get one or two answers.
PlayStation 2.
PlayStation.
But were they really the only two players in town? I mean, survival horror was arguably born on the PS1 with the original Resident Evil, and the PS2 had Silent Hill 2, what many people still consider to be the greatest survival horror game of all time. But there was also the Nintendo GameCube, which had a few great survival horror games itself. It had Eternal Darkness, the amazing Resident Evil remake. Resident Evil 4 was also a GameCube exclusive for a short period of time, and how could anyone possibly forget Luigi's Mansion? My point is, practically every console was home to at least a few great survival horror games, and we're going to be taking a look at some of those consoles today, starting with Nintendo. Obviously, I'm not going to be covering every survival horror game ever made, because I'm not fucking insane, but I will be highlighting the ones worth your time. I also won't be covering any horror games before the PS1 era, like Splatterhouse, since they don't really qualify as survival horror games in my opinion. The N64. Listen, the N64 really isn't a great console to buy if you're looking for some amazing survival horror games. In fact, it only really has one, Resident Evil 2. Now don't get me wrong, it's a great port and a technical marvel, but the game is also on the PS1, along with a huge number of other amazing survival horror games. The N64 is bottom of my list when it comes to consoles with great survival horror games. Now we're talking. The GameCube had some great survival horror games. Eternal Darkness is an excellent little mindfuck of a game, with an intriguing story and some great scares. Resident Evil Remake might be my favourite game in the entire series, and is still the greatest remake of any game ever, in my honest opinion. What even needs to be said about Resident Evil 4 at this point? It might be the single greatest game ever made. I've completed it at least 20 times by this point, and I still have a blast every time I play it. On top of those classics, practically every Resident Evil game released up to that point was also on the system. Resident Evil 2, 3 and Code Veronica. Resident Evil 0 is also a game that exists. The Wii is a great system to pick up if you want to play some amazing survival horror games. Not only do you get some great Wii exclusive horror games, but you can also play your entire GameCube library on the console too, so you'll never be stuck for good survival horror games to play. Project Zero 2, or Fatal Frame 2 in America, is one of my favourite games on any console, and the Wii version is the definitive way to play it. It's a truly terrifying game, and is up there with Silent Hill 2 as one of my favourite horror games of all time. Manhunt 2 is a decent horror game. Unfortunately, the Wii version is way too censored, which removes a huge amount of the fun from the game. If you're going to play it, I highly recommend either the PS2 version or the uncensored PC version. Silent Hill Shattered Memories is my favourite Western developed Silent Hill game. Now that might not sound like high praise, but Shattered Memories is still legitimately a great experience with an amazing story. It's not scary at all, unfortunately, but there's still plenty to enjoy with this title. Obscure 2 is a rare survival horror game in that it actually features a co-op mode. The game has a terrible plot, awful controls and broken combat, but I still absolutely love it. It has that B-movie charm in spades. The puzzles are decent and it's a great laugh in co-op. Don't take it too seriously and you'll have a fun time. Cursed Mountain is a bit shit, to be honest. It has a great atmosphere, but it's not even remotely scary. The combat is dreadful and overall it can be quite tedious to play. Avoid. Finally, we have the Wii U. Even though I am not a fan of the console, it had some decent horror games. ZombiU, for example, is a great horror experience. It's a true survival horror game with an amazing setting. A single mistake could be your last, and dying actually carries consequences in this world. One of the best experiences on the Wii U, in my honest opinion. Resident Evil Revelations is an updated port of the 3DS game. It's still a great game to this day, and is a great choice for players who maybe aren't a fan of the more action-focused games in the series. The Wii U also had a Fatal Frame game. It's supposed to be pretty decent, but I haven't played it yet, so I don't have a lot to say about it. And that's pretty much it for Nintendo home consoles. I will take a look at the Nintendo Switch when it's been on the market for a few years, but next video we'll be looking at survival horror games on the Xbox line of consoles. Hope you look forward to it.
Well done. Player one, ready. All right. Yeah. Great shot. Winner. Player one.
But were they really the only two players in town? I mean, survival horror was arguably born on the PS1 with the original Resident Evil, and the PS2 had Silent Hill 2, what many people still consider to be the greatest survival horror game of all time.